braving the chilly, chilly weather. This is our first of what is hopefully approximately a quarterly series we intend on doing for NancyOnNorwalk.
Right.
Yes. This first one, we're going to lean in on some things that I think people are having conversations about themselves and their relation to independent news generally. And we are so excited to have two wonderful guests for our very first non-talks series. We have the two-time Emmy Award-winning journalist and author, Alisyn Camerota.
Hey. Yeah.
And our Secretary of the State, Stephanie Thomas.
Woo!
The run of the show is we're going to have a chat here for about an hour. We're going to take a few of the questions that the board of directors are going over right now as we speak. We're going to run those for about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll have a few minutes here for mingling and things like that. We also have 5 copies of Alisyn's memoir here, which we're very excited about. You received a raffle ticket, and she's been kind enough to autograph 5 of those, and we'll pull those, and 5 of you will win something. So I've read it. It's a wonderful read.
Oh,
It goes
thank
by
you.
very fast.
Yes.
You'll read it in a day or two, and so that's the plan.
Thank you.
Very happy to have you here. Just a very quick history here. Oh, by the way, I'm Justin Matley. I'm Vice Chair, NancyOnNorwalk. I'm also a stutterer, so if you find my head weaving and bobbing or something weird happening with my face, don't worry about having a heart attack or a seizure. This isn't about me, this is about them right here. So just flagging that. Okay, so a little bit of history. 1789, there was a joint session of Congress. And there were 12 constitutional amendments that were proposed and were ratified in 1791 as the Bill of Rights. Now, the language is very specific in it, but it's open to, as we've seen over the course of 250 years of our country, is open to interpretation. James Madison, one of our founding fathers, actually, he felt that it was restrictive language. And Thomas Jefferson thought that it should evolve beyond the words on the page. So it's clear then, just as it is right now, that there's a flood of interpreting that's happening. So Article 3 became the First Amendment, and the language is such that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And Lord knows we have grievances. So, in any case, but before we dive into that, I would love to just hear from both of you about yourselves, your careers. You have ascended to the pinnacles of both of your career paths. What got you on your pathways? What was the seed of it all?
You want to start?
Sure. Am I on?
Yeah.
Okay.
I hear you.
Okay.
Do you guys hear?
Yeah, it doesn't sound amplified like yours.
Yeah.
Have a green light. Alisyn, feel free.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's a good idea. I'll start. So as 5 of you will read in my memoir, Combat Love, I got the idea to be a broadcast journalist when I was 15 years old. I was at home after high school doing what I did every afternoon, which was watching Phil Donahue on television. And I was sitting around very just like this, with stairs up and down, and I had one of those eureka moments where I thought, what's that job called? Is that a job? Does he get paid for that? And somebody told me that that was called broadcast journalist. And from that time on, when I was 15, that was my North Star, and I wanted to be a broadcast journalist, and I only applied to schools, colleges that had TV stations, which at that time were very few. Now they're proliferating more, but at that time, I could count them on almost one hand, and I ended up going to American that on a full scholarship. That was why I chose that, but it was great because it was in DC. And so I, as an intern, got to run around Capitol Hill with a microphone and ask politicians questions, and that was very cool.
Back then they answered.
Sort of. I mean, yes, they did answer, I would say. That has changed, in fact. And they didn't just spout nonsense then, yeah. And so then my first job ever, I think that this is, I'll tell you about 2 jobs. Maybe there's more that you need to know about. My first 2 jobs, which were set the groundwork for journalism, was I worked for Ted Koppel. So I was a desk assistant for Ted Koppel. At that time, he was America's preeminent interviewer. I sort of learned through osmosis. I logged all of his tapes. After an interview, he would come back, and I was the person who had to, for hours, sit and transcribe what he had done out in the field. So I got to learn a little bit about his craft. And I went from there to a place that Ted Koppel told me would ruin my career if I chose it, and that was America's Most Wanted. So I went to the crime show, America's Most Wanted, and I was a crime reporter for 5 years, and it was fantastic. And I think at that time, Ted thought, and it shows how far we've come in journalism, that was too much of a blurring of the lines. America's Most Wanted did recreations. So they had actors playing the fugitives who were missing and playing the victims, and that was very uncomfortable to capital J journalists. That said, for me, it was a fantastic training ground because it was life and death. We were finding people and bringing them back for a lifetime in prison or the death penalty. So we had to be right. We had to have all of our facts right. We couldn't just believe the cops' stories. We had to triangulate sources. It was such a wonderful journalistic training ground for me because it was life and death. And so I'm very proud of my work there and interviewing all of the mass murderers that I got to interview and serial rapists. And, once we captured them, I would go into the prison and be like, why did you do it? What do you have to say to the victim's family? And that was a great experience. It was really cool for a 25-year-old. Then I went on to do some national news for NBC. I went in local news, and then I went to the Fox News Channel. So a year or 2 I started there as a correspondent I was the New England-based correspondent, and I watched the advent of Fox News. I watched how they started to gain on CNN and how they ultimately took the #1 slot. I watched how they bent the rules of journalism, and then I watched how they disregarded all of the rules of journalism. And Roger Ailes was, a sort of Trump-like leader, very iron-fisted and not terribly rooted in facts or reality. And I wasn't comfortable for a long time with how they operated, with how he was operating. It took me a long time to get out of there, but I tried to get out of there for many years. And then I was happy to be able to go to CNN and worked there for 10 years and had the longest run on the morning show, New Day, And that was a great experience and a peak experience for me. And then, I know we can get into this, for the past year, I've been in this new media landscape of Substack and a podcast and, trying to cobble together kind of a portfolio model now, which is what we journalists who've left legacy media call it, and that's been hard. It's been hard. It's been satisfying in a lot of ways. The freedom and flexibility is really satisfying. The lack of infrastructure, the lack of researchers, the lack of producers, the lack of fact checkers is hard. It's hard. And so that's where I am right now, and I know we can talk more about that.
Wow, I want to read the book now. Well, my story could not be more opposite. I still don't know what I want to do when I grew up. When I was 15, I actually wanted to be a lawyer, but that didn't happen. So I really, after I graduated from college, I got into what I like to say, devoting my life to the public good. My first job out of college was for a nonprofit, and I thought, wow, I can wake up every day. It happened to be for the United Negro College Fund, and I had grown up very poor, so going to college was not guaranteed, but I had gotten a scholarship, and I remember just thinking, I can wake up every day and help people get to college, people who might not get there. Like, I had no idea because, you grow up like doctor, lawyer, all of these things, especially when you grow up poor, like you think, I have to make good, I have to earn money, etc. My biggest ambition at that point was to earn $50,000 a year, which would be more than my parents ever made, probably combined, etc. So I learned about the nonprofit sector. I decided right then and there that I would never take a job that was about enhancing shareholder value, but that I would give back and pay it forward, because I was very fortunate that I was able to get a scholarship, go to New York University, get good jobs, etc. Then I decided to get my master's in nonprofit management, and when I was in graduate school, I got a job, actually an internship that was supposed to last for 3 weeks. For a fundraising consulting firm, nonprofit fundraising. It ended up lasting 19 years. I became president of the company. And then I went on to start my own fundraising consultancy. And I was doing that very happily because I was raising about $20 to $30 million a year in New York City for like hundreds and hundreds of nonprofits. And I never once thought about politics. I voted in every election, for sure. Of course, I watched the evening news, as one did in those days, because I grew up at a time when we only had 3 channels. And the television went off.
It's unthinkable, unimaginable now, I know.
So I just never thought about it. I voted in every election because I grew up in a Black household where I heard stories about people in my family who weren't able to vote and how important it was. My mother always voted. But I didn't really think much about our democracy or what happened beyond voting. And then I like to say I got into politics the old-fashioned way. I saw someone doing something and I thought I could do it better. And literally, I was just like everybody else who was like, how come they haven't? And I kept using that word they. And one day I had an epiphany, like, I might be the one I'm looking for. Who is the they? At that time, I owned my own business. My husband was very supportive. I thought, if I don't have the time and bandwidth to step out and try to run for office, who does? So I ran. Many of my supporters from back then I see in the audience. It was the craziest state representative race ever. I got in so late. I had no campaign manager, but it was great. And I only lost, I did lose, by a couple of hundred votes, which told me that perhaps I was on to something. I ran again, I won. And then, you know, I was in government, and I sort of thought, how did I get here? Like, people are like, when did you decide to get into politics? I'm like, I still haven't decided. I don't want to be in politics. I want to be in the public good. And being in the legislature, although yes, you're a lawmaker, and it was a very fascinating time of my life, I like to be expert at whatever I'm doing. And when you're in the legislature, there's like 4,000 bills suggested a year. I felt like, I mean, it drove me crazy. I'm like, I need to read every single bill. I need to know all the details of every single bill. It was not a good personality fit for me. But when Secretary Denise Merrill announced that she would not run for re-election, I thought, wow, that is the best job in government I have ever heard. Like, you're dealing with voting and civics and also business, because as a small business owner myself, being able to start my business was transformative and the only thing that really changed my socioeconomic circumstances. So I just thought, wow, that is the job in government that I would want to have. But it never occurred to me that I should run for it because I was 1 year as a state rep and no one knew me. And it just seemed like beyond me, but I got some really good advice. A woman said to me, another state rep, like, okay, like it sounds like you don't want to run, but is that because you're doing what women do and assume you can't do a job unless you've already done it? Or do you really think this isn't the right time for you to run? And I'm like, oh, it's the first one. I'm doing that woman thing. So I considered, I ran. I need a book to talk about that whole process, but I won.
That would be good.
I'm going to give the mic back to Jessica.
So people often relate the power of government with information consumption. And what I mean by that is we've always had news dictated and disseminated by a very few, and very often it's land-owning white men. You know, whether it be Samuel Adams in the late 18th century, to the yellow papers to turn it on the following century, and the tabloids of the area, and it seems we've entered our own change in weather with regards to media and power and decision making. David Alisyn would be one example, and we recently had a CBS News 60 Minutes story shelved the morning that it was due to air, after standards and practices already went through it. You can reflect how unusual that is. I would just love to hear in your own respective roles that you play, how has the corporatization and thus the politicalization influenced, impacted, changed the work that you each do?
Well, I don't want to be alarmist, but it's time to be alarmed, I would say, about what's happening in the media, particularly the corporate influence that you're referring to. So I mean, we can just use that CCOT story of 60 Minutes as an example. So, you know, the way that went down was completely unprofessional, completely antithetical to anything that I've seen in my 35 years. Yes, sometimes you hold stories. Sometimes a big story like that, an investigative piece, is not ready for air. Absolutely. But you don't do it at the 11th hour. In the case of, in my experience, let's say America's Most Wanted, there were times that the FBI or the sheriff said, we're begging you not to do that story tonight on Friday night because we're this close to catching the fugitive and you're going to ruin it. If you put it out there, you're going to spook him and you're going to ruin it. And for the public good, we would be like, okay, we'll hold it. But we're not holding it forever, and we'll tell you that we're going to hold it for 1 week. I mean, there's a date certain. To when, if you're going to do something that you think is for the public good, you don't just indefinitely shelve something. And so the idea that Bari Weiss, the head of CBS News, indefinitely shelved it because at the 11th hour, because she wanted to give the Trump administration more time to respond, they'd already refused to respond. You don't just give somebody the endless amount of time to hoping they come around. That's not how it works. And then, as you guys probably know, they did air it this past Sunday night on a holiday weekend without any fanfare, without announcing that they were re-airing it. And it was such a great story. It was so illuminating. It was so disturbing. It was so important that we know what's happening at CCOT. And the fact that they did it without any publicity, that's not how a news organization, you want viewers to see your stories. That's generally how it works. So there's an incredible amount of corporate pressure right now, not just from the Alisons, but across the board. ABC, there's political pressure, there's corporate pressure. So the Alisons are an example of both, I guess, because the father, Larry, is a big supporter of President Trump. And these news organizations like ABC and CBS are acquiescing to President Trump before they have to, paying him $15 million in these frivolous lawsuits. So when you ask like how it's affected me personally, it didn't until I mean, like, this is new. This second 2.0 Trump administration is, obviously breaking all of the rules of any separation between politics and journalists. He is curtailing press freedoms and the First Amendment that you started with. I felt definitely corporate and political pressure at Fox, but that was rare. So I knew that if I left Fox, if I could get out of Fox, I could go someplace else, any other network, and I could go back to journalism, the rules of journalism and journalism as we know it. But now, I don't feel that way.
Who generally makes the calls? The networks. What would be the, that's okay. What would be the traditional chain of events from the concept of a story?
Yeah, I mean, it's a group effort. It's a group effort. It's the producer finds something, or the correspondent finds something, and you work as a team. And by the way, it's journalism is kind of a living, breathing organism where you do duke it out. There's no one right way to tell a story. I've been in a million different story meetings around a conference room table where you say, I don't know if I trust this particular source. I think we should get somebody else in addition to this character. I think we need to balance it with this character. And somebody else in the room says, no, that person's rock solid. I don't think we need another person. You duke it out. You air out your vision for it. In fact, we have things called vision meetings where you talk about how you're going to lay out this story. And then when the correspondent and the producer are satisfied, then at a real news network, there's fact checkers, there's standards and practices, there's lawyers. It goes up the chain where everybody says, this looks good, or maybe you do want to add another. Did you try to talk to the Trump administration? I mean, this is a typical conversation that we would have. How many times did you call? Who said no? Did you just email or did you call them? How many times? And who, did you go above that person? Like, these are real questions. And then at some point, it's fully baked enough that you all say, this is as good as it's going to get. I'm comfortable with telling this story. We've done as good as we can, and you pull the trigger, and it airs. And that's, so in other words, the executive producer, standards and practices, production assistants, researchers, it's a team effort. And I've always loved that element of it being a team effort. So the idea that one person, a Bari Weiss, comes in and kills it is highly unusual.
expert in media, so it's a good thing there's someone here who is.
Had some recent
But,
events.
yeah, so there are three things that raced into my mind, so I'm gonna try and remember all three and string them together. Starting with the First Amendment, part of the reason it exists is to limit or to stop the federal government from being too powerful, right? That if you don't have a free press, freedom to dissent, freedom to speak up, if you see something that you don't like, then the government is too powerful in a government that is supposed to be ruled by the people. What I know is that and I'm gonna use the word democracy, but I use that interchangeably. Republic, constitutional democracy, representative democracy, and just democracy. And I find democracy is a good shorthand, but I mean all those things. In a democracy, if you don't have access to information that you deem credible and reliable, it starts to eat away at the edges. Why would you vote if you don't believe the outcome or any of the information about the candidates? Why would you get involved in civic engagement if you don't believe the information that you're getting? In our society, the media traditionally has played that role of providing the information. And see, now I forgot the third thing. Oh my gosh. It was something, I totally forget. But I was going to say that the problem that I'm seeing right now with the way media is now being structured, aside from the trust issue, it's just the lack of proliferation. Everyone is up here. National, I see it all the time. I can't tell you if there's a national news story, I'm gonna get emails. Stop connecting our voting machines to the internet. I'm like, until last year, our voting machines are so old they can't connect to the internet. Go back to paper ballots right now. I'm like, Connecticut never left paper ballots.
It seemed like any jazz was that long ago.
But, like, everyone is at this national news level, and that is having a few different effects in my space. One, it makes it easier to distrust because like no one knows like what's actually happening in their local jurisdiction. But also, unless you're running for president here in Connecticut, like there's not that much money in elections. I think of my Secretary of the State peers around the country, some of them have had to raise as much as $20 million for their race. So if you don't raise enough money, guess what that means? You're not communicating with voters. And without a local press, I mean, thank goodness for NancyOnNorwalk, but that doesn't exist in every town around Connecticut. So without local press or like more state press, the stories aren't even getting out there about policies being enacted, about candidates running for office, and that also, I think, has a very harmful effect on a democracy.
That's such a great point. I'm so glad that you made that point because when we're all operating at a national level, whatever happens in the Nevada voting system or in the Georgia Secretary of State, it feels like, oh, well, that must be happening here, that must be happening. And so then you field all the calls from anxious people when, in fact, if there were a more robust, if local press hadn't been gutted with all sorts of problems and budget issues, people wouldn't have to be at that fever pitch thinking that everything that's happening around the country is happening in Connecticut.
It's great that you were like, both of you, just to prop up the two areas I wanted to go into next. I'm going to choose the one and then I'll land on the other afterwards. Australia just banned social media wholly for ages 16 and under. Yeah. The average adult spends 5 to 6 hours a day grown adult on social media. The average under 18 is up to 9 hours on average. So you're talking quarter to a third of your life. And 60% of adults receive 100% of their information of what's happening in the world on social media. An environment that does not have a standards and practices process, that is influenced by generative AI, that I'm in industry and that stuff looks pretty good now, I have to say. And I'm trained to have to see these things, and I'm fooled, especially the cat videos. What about the consumption climate that we're in? And I use that phrase broadly, and I'll let you run with it. It informs your own work. In particular, safeguarding individual rights with the demands of the 21st century that we're in, because there's no going back either.
I'm not sure if this answers your question, but one thing that just occurred to me that most people don't seem to be aware of. There is no law that I'm aware of anywhere that requires government to teach you how to engage with your government. There are laws around informing you about how to register to vote, or what kind of signage has to be in your polling place, or how old you have to be to vote. But there's nothing really governing your civic literacy, if you will. But people, I think, don't think about that and what that means. So when we live in this social media culture, I worry because you've got it local media, people don't believe national media. Anybody has a microphone and puts out whatever they want. Where are people getting their civic literacy? And how do you participate in a democracy in a functional way if you don't know how, you don't know how to get the information, you don't even know that you don't have the information? It's very troubling. I, at least since January 21st of last year, I get all of my election news in various news outlets that are specific to elections around the country. And I read some articles here and there, but I consume all my other news via social, usually, and via notifications, because honestly, I cannot take more than one sentence on top of everything else I have to do. It's too anxiety producing, really.
Well, that's, and I think that's a great thing, because remember, we had a call about a week ago, and we had a nice conversation, and I actually made a point to note that one of the most interesting sections of that conversation was actually around the fact that what we consume nowadays is so short. If you follow anything to Google Analytics, anything, it actually used to be about 3 minutes. Now it's increased down about just over a minute now, where the viewership drops off, is really exponentially off a cliff.
And I'll turn this over to Alisyn in a minute, but the reason we got into that conversation is government is complicated. There is nothing that happens in government that can be distilled into 60 seconds, like, period.
How do you grapple that? with that
So-
when you're trying to give information out?
So no, like people's eyes gloss over and they don't listen.
Yeah.
Like I remember I was trying to get people to come testify about early voting, and everyone's like, I want early voting, and I'm like, that's not how laws work. Do you want 1 day? Do you want 1 hour? Do you want 100 days? Like, these things have to be written into law. Do you want every town to early vote? Just some towns? Do you want it to be at midnight? Like, literally, policy is so incredibly detailed. So when we lose stories on 60 Minutes, we lose long format journalism, we lose local press, and everything is in 60-second sound bites. How can we, the people, make decisions about who's governing us and how they're doing it if all of our stories are 60 seconds long? And the answer is, this is what we get. We're seeing it now.
Yeah. Well, a couple things. Civic was there used to be 3 networks, and we believed in them and we trusted them for a reason. We knew that they had our best interest at heart. We knew that they were trying. We knew that they were smart and educated and knew about journalism. And so we didn't have to become media literate because we just knew that we were so. Now we have to be educated consumers. And that is a much more proactive, we're asking people, consumers, to be much more proactive and not just let the news wash over you. You have to know the source. The delivery system has changed. Yes, you can still get your news on social media. You can go to Facebook or Instagram, but you have to know, is it CNN? Is it CNN's headlines that you're reading? Or are you reading somebody's take on CNN's headlines?
Yeah.
And so you have to understand what the source is. And of course, the challenge is that our kids have been trained to just see headlines and be an inch deep in terms of what they're getting. There's an organization that I'm involved with called the News Literacy Project. I suggest you guys all check it out, newsliteracy.org, and they go into schools from grade schools through high schools to start teaching kids about the First Amendment, about how to spot fake news, about how you have to check different sources, about if something sounds too weird or salacious, it probably is, don't spread it. Like, there's all sorts of good news hygiene and news literacy. But again, it's asking a lot of the reader and the consumer to have to do all this stuff. We didn't used to have to do it, but now we do have to do that. In terms of being educated about government, you couldn't be more right, Secretary. Like, we also have lots of lawmakers in Washington, D.C. who are not there for, They just say sound bites. I mean, so all of that, so of course people have no idea how the sausage is made. And, that's a really tough one. So back to the social media thing for 1 second. I am very heartened by what Australia did, because we do know that social media is bad for all of our kids' mental health. There's enough research that has proven that time and again, and our teenagers will tell you. And I have found with my teenagers, of which I have 3, they have weaned themselves off of social media. They used to, so 5 years ago, they were kind of and after being on for too many, comparing with their classmates and seeing their classmates' trips and seeing what the classmates were wearing, and it starts to make you feel actually a little physically sick. So they have stopped using it as much. I don't think they're alone. I think that there's a way to titrate it better, and Australia, the fact that Australia has figured out how to pass this legislation should make us all feel better that we don't have to be sitting ducks. If we don't like something, you don't have to be sitting ducks. We just, in the United States, are having a hard time all on the same side of something right now.
I want to lean into the generational thing for 1 second, because I found, at least with my own family, the ones that are disseminating the most slop are actually the older folks in my family. They bought it hook, line, and sinker across the board, and it's actually, it's actually some of the younger folks that I teach, while they might be more ignorant of the world, they can see through some of the things. It's because they're accustomed to seeing it, because it's such a factor of their lives. Was there a vector in terms of like being a parent in this? Because there's parents and grandparents in here, and I'm also a parent. Was there something with your own children that sort of...
I wouldn't say there was a tipping point in particular, but I do think that, as you point out, they are kind of savvy, not just my kids. Teenagers are kind of savvy about cell phones. So they understand, like, I think that there's a feeling sometimes of the older generation where it must be true, it just came across my news feed, because we used to believe news hook, line, and sinker. And so we didn't have to have the critical thinking skills that now are required for all of us. It's so funny. The cell phones are such a double-edged sword, because you carry around an encyclopedia in your pocket now. So never been easier to fact check something ever. So there was but it's so easy. It takes 30 seconds. I was listening the other day because I was forcing myself to Megyn Kelly's podcast because I was trying to actually study something, and she was spreading some sort of disgusting misinformation with these other podcasters about something that Merrick Garland had said about a school board meeting, and that Merrick Garland had allegedly called parents domestic terrorists. And I was like, that doesn't sound right. And I went to my phone, I was like, did Merrick Garland, and literally it was 10 seconds. That's been debunked. All sorts of fact checkers, that was never said, Merrick Garland never said that the origin of this was on a right wing. Like, you can fact check it like that. So, back to my point, we're not used to having to fact check because we used to trust our news. My kids can be a little bit more like, is that right? Like, wait, that's not right. And so I'm comforted that teenagers, older teenagers at least, can have a little bit of that critical thinking. Not all, but they know how to use their phones in that way.
Although,
yeah, yeah.
I like to do fun things like pop-up civics quizzes. So over the summer, we were going around Connecticut, stopping people on pickleball courts and other places, seeing if they could pass the naturalization test.
Oh my gosh.
And, believe it or not, the younger they were, there were some fourth graders who knew the answers.
Wow.
I was like, what school are you at? I'm like, oh, it's a private school. But there were these 5 kids playing pickleball. They were all in AP governance, it turned out. Wow. 2 were 18, 3 were 17. So we were talking for a while. And I said, oh, okay, so do you plan to vote in do you plan to register to vote? Yes. Do you plan to vote in every election? So I was like, why? Like, why wouldn't you vote? They were like, well, I don't think I might not have all the information I want to make a decision. So I said, you do know you get to control that, right? Have you heard of the internet? But it hadn't, and I've heard this from so many young people. I'm like, why do you not realize you have this encyclopedia in your pocket, and that we live in this time of incredible open government? Meetings are recorded. You can go to YouTube and watch almost every government meeting right now.
State government.
Yes, state
Actually,
government.
I mean, there's cabinet meetings.
Federal government, local government. All this stuff is recorded, or you can read the minutes, but no one thinks to use it. I don't know. I feel like I'm giving a lot of data of things that are chipping away.
So I have to say that in 1995, when I convinced my father to let us get America Online, the thing that put it over the top was saying that this was a self-updating encyclopedia. That's what put it over the top for him. So you guys hit it around the head. I reorganized my cards.
Okay.
I'm gonna land on one more thing. So there was a New York Times guest essay just the other day that my colleagues actually flagged for me, which is fantastic and fortuitous timing here as well. It is called Local Newspapers Are Closing. Local news is thriving. And I've got 2 quotes out of it from it, really quick. Quote, when communities lose their local news outlets, civic engagement drops, corruption rises, government waste increases, and political polarization worsens. End quote. Quote, problem is not a lack of public appetite, but an outdated business model. And it cites a variety of small, independent, non-profit news outlets. Texas Tribune, Fort Worth Report, Spotlight PA, the Pittsburgh Public Source, and why I list those was because all of those have been cited by their congressmen and women in support of or objection to legislation in this last year. So they are being read, and they're being trusted. So what can we do as a responsible citizenry to rebuild the trust that I think, to people who see CNN and they're gone. That's it, they're out. I'm out, Fox News up, I'm out, right? How can we be better news consumers? How can we be better voters? How can we be better electorate?
I'm not sure, but I do know that the closer you are to something, the more you trust it. There have been all these surveys in the democracy space, and ironically, most people trust their elections, but they think other people, they're like, Connecticut has good elections, but I don't know about Arkansas. Or like Kentucky's like, we have great elections, but Massachusetts.
That's exactly it. It's like,
yeah.
There are some things that make certain groups of people, whether it be geographical or whether it be any number of variables that make us uncomfortable, right?
The unknown makes us uncomfortable as someone who has run for office several times. When, I think of NancyOnNorwalk, I think of Good Morning Wilton, I think of, oh my gosh, what's Dan's,
Woke,
Yes, thank you,
yeah.
thank you. Oh my gosh, Dan, I'm sorry. Norwalk. but, when the person who's running the outlet is at the speech, at the event, talks to me personally, they're gonna write a very different story than, a larger outlet. They will know what the community is interested in, wants to talk about. So I find it's less clickbait-like and more, and they know they're gonna run into everyone at the grocery store. You're not gonna just write any old thing. Yeah, so, and I don't know how we get back to that local press, because I do think there's an appetite for it. But I don't know what the financial model is, because people don't even want to pay for news at all anymore, so it's tricky.
Well, There's a donate button on our website.
I mean, I think making a nonprofit does make some sense. But as someone who worked in the nonprofit sector for a
You
long time,
understand.
yeah, it's not that easy to raise money. So yes, everyone give to NancyOnNorwalk. But yeah, I don't know. I don't have the solution, but we have to do something.
Well, I mean, I think that you've touched on what has to happen. I think that everybody does have to support independent press. And, you know, here again, this does require us to open our pocketbooks and support it because it's so valuable. So local and national and international. I mean, I think that, you know, ProPublica is doing fantastic investigative pieces. They're so transparent and they rely on donors, you know, and they rely on foundations and people to subscribe to them and give money. The Guardian does, you know, great international news. NancyOnNorwalk, everybody should be supporting. I mean, when I read NancyOnNorwalk, it's so comforting. It's so comforting. It's such a different visceral experience than reading anything else. It's like my limbic system isn't triggered, you know? Like I don't go into fight or flight when I'm reading. I just am getting old-fashioned information. It's so refreshing.
Local news has that
Yes,
appeal to it.
and I think you're so right. Like you guys do rely on local news. That's where you cover city council meetings. That's where you know what's going on. I mean, it was local news that told us what was happening with the water supply in Michigan. Like we wouldn't have known that. You know, there are people on the ground that nationally you can't know things unless you are on the ground. So number one, people have to support that for sure. And then in terms of just in general, what I tell people about news is, you know, go with the trusted, true track record. I mean, you all have been reading news long enough to know that you trust certain journalists at the New York Times, or you trust the Wall Street Journal, or there have been people who have left, lots of journalists now have left legacy media, and they've gone to Substack, and you can follow individuals who you know are still, like I love Heather Cox Richardson, not that she's a journalist, but she has she cites all of her sources and where she's getting her information. Not citing their sources, that's a red flag. So for where you're getting your information. So, you know, I think that unfortunately it does require, as I said, opening your pocketbook. One stat that Brian Stelter put out, he's the media analyst for CNN, he said that the average American household is now subscribing to 7 different news sources. So everybody does want information. People do want news. They do want journalism. They do want real information. But I find that people are getting oversaturated. There's a saturation level because,
Streaming services.
yes, it's like streaming services. There's so much content, and some of it's excellent content in journalism, but it does require you paying for 7 different things, and that's a lot to ask of people. So I tell people to go with your, you know the places that are award-winning, that have excellent track records of truth, and follow them.
I've got some questions.
Oh, good. Okay.
Oh, we've got one more. I'm betting I'm on a fly. There's a handful of these that we actually have already hit one way or am I?
Yeah, there's one more here, right here.
Oh, you can give it to me. We're just rolling here. We're just rolling. All right, my pick one. What do you feel is, and this is both of you, currently the largest threat to our First Amendment rights? And I think that means First Amendment wholly, I don't know, probably as a whole, as opposed to just what we're talking about, the press here. And what can us regular folks do?
I'll take the freedom of the press fears and what all of the threats that are happening to the freedom of the press element of the First Amendment. The Trump administration is curtailing press freedom at every turn. So there are just a million different examples of the ways in which President Trump is hurting journalism. So, for instance, Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, has lessened press protections. So the laws or executive orders that Biden and his predecessors had put into place, she's now doing away with. And so in the past week, as you probably know, a Washington Post reporter had her 2 laptops and notes seized by the FBI. And she had something like more than 1,000 sources, government sources, that would speak to her confidentially. So now the FBI has seized her stuff and will have those. So that's something that normally the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos, the owner, would have gone to court immediately, would have spoken out against, not doing that. And Pam Bondi would never have allowed, I mean, you know, the Attorney General wouldn't have allowed something like that to happen. So, I mean, those are very serious threats to press freedom. And then there's just all of the other stuff of President Trump calling journalists names, calling them the enemies of the people. He calls them personally names. He calls them stupid. He calls them piggy. So he denigrates journalists personally. He denigrates journalism. When you call somebody an enemy of the state or an enemy of the people, that obviously opens up journalists to physical harm and threats, which we've seen. Internationally, journalists are having much more, there's much more threats, and journalists have been killed in the past year, particularly with the Gaza and Israel situation, much more than they had been in the years prior. So there's all sorts of things like that that are going on. And all I can say is, you know, don't normalize it. We can't normalize this. Speak out, you know, call your local Congress people, tell them how outraged you are, tell them what they're doing that's good, that you like, tell them what they're doing that you hate, tell them how outraged you are. You know, I mean, I still believe that protests do get the administration's attention. We just can't sit by and wait for the First Amendment to be so eroded.
I think that was thorough. You have a lot of cards. I'm more worried about other amendments.
Okay. I've got a funding question here. Can local press stay independent with government support? Would a news tax make sense? I'm not sure what that is, so I can't add any context.
As a lay person, it sounds interesting, but, you know, I think as someone who used to have to pass laws about new taxes, people usually aren't happy to see them. And we're under so much pressure financially, like a whole another subject could be about the shrinking middle class. You know, more likely, there would need to be a tax connected to something that is adjacent, that the payers of those tax would like it going to the news, if that makes sense. I don't know what that would be, but.
I mean, I hadn't really thought about a news tax, but now that I think about it, we are kind of all paying a news tax, like I was saying, with all of our subscriptions. Like, it's just, you have to pay one way or another. So people are paying for their news now, but maybe that's more palatable than a new tax, which everyone hates, as you know.
It's also tricky, you know. I think what we're seeing right now is the potential danger of government being overly involved in certain things. Once it's a taxpayer or a tax, like there's bound to be some regulation, some sway, etc. So I don't know if that helps or hurts.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. I mean, I think just a tax wouldn't help revitalize local news right now. I mean, I just think that it's been decimated. And so to rebuild, I mean, you would know better actually than I what it takes to run an organization, you know, that's a sort of grassroots organization, and the amount of coverage, the amount of energy it takes for the coverage, just for Nancy on Norwalk.
How did you, when you worked for shareholding organizations, how did you view entity like the Corporation for Public Broadcasting?
I don't know. I didn't put much thought into it. I mean, I was happy it was there. I took it for granted. I took it for granted. I mean, that's another press freedom that's being eroded that I didn't list, that obviously the dismantling and defunding of the public broadcasting. So, you know, because I've always worked for profit networks, I just took it for granted. And like we have done, so as I've said, for so much of our journalism, so much of our First Amendment, and we're in trouble now.
So this is a good one. And it's always interesting, you know, personal experience, like we all have an uncle, and my uncle has a nephew, and just by default, there's immediately something that has happened in particular, I want to say, on Facebook, right, that has more of the chat room quality to it, sort of like the, you know, the power of the cloak of anonymity. And it, that, like, would you say this to this person in real life? Would you? Is this how you ran into them at the grocery store? How do we talk to each other when and this is a tweak on this question here, so I apologize if you ever asked this question. I'm just going to tweak it a bit. When the question is when news comes from so many different sources, I want to tweak it and say when our worldviews are so different.
Well, I just want to say it's the algorithm is ruining us, because everybody is reading, we're not even reading the same stories anymore. So depending upon, the algorithm knows if you vote red or blue, where you are geographically, what other news things you've looked into, and so they keep feeding you what they think you want. You know, they keep that steady diet of whatever keeps you clicking. And so, I mean, you know, we just saw this with the election of Donald Trump, that the people whose algorithms fed them, you know, fear-mongering stories about immigration, thought that that was the #1 issue in the country. Even my friend, I have a dear friend who I worked with in TV news, who lives in Larchmont. And she told me that was, she's a one-issue voter, she told me. I said, oh, what issue? She said, immigration. I said, what? In Larchmont? Why? What are you talking about? And she said, because it's, you know, an invasion.
Yeah.
And so that was her algorithm, okay? She's reading something entirely different. She doesn't think that the economy is the #1 issue. She's not voting on the economy. She's not voting on tariffs. And so that's a big problem, because you can't even, it's a totally different script. And you know, if you go down that rabbit hole, then you're just constantly being fed that reinforces your worldview and that bias. So, I mean, you know, look, what's the answer? Obviously meeting with your neighbors, obviously having an open mind, obviously approaching people with curiosity and compassion. But I feel like we already do that. I mean, you know, that's what we come out to community events. We like to talk to people here. I think it's hard geographically. We are all in our own bubbles, even geographically.
This feels like a time for a quote.
Is it inspirational?
Well, there's a book I read a couple of years ago by, Richard Haas, I believe, Bill? Yeah, Richard Haas, The Bill of Obligations, about what our obligations are as citizens of a democracy. And those obligations, he said, be informed, get involved, stay open to compromise, remain civil, reject violence, value norms, promote the common good, respect government service, support the teaching of civics, put country first. And, you know, we don't talk about many of those, but be informed is what we're talking about today. But remaining civil, rejecting violence, staying open to compromise requires intentionality and discipline. So whether it's on Facebook, at the corner, like we all have to bring that into the space. My staff always tells me, like, they won't give me the password to our social media because they're like, do not write anything bad. Because when I'm running my own campaign and people write nonsense, like, I just feel I have to address it.
Yeah.
And often it's a bot, so I let it go, but like, you just have to be intentional about it. And I am in this weird position of being an elected Democrat, but like, my job is nonpartisan and everyone has to trust elections. And it's very hard to walk that line, to never bring what most people consider politics into my work. And in order to do that, I always have to be honest and transparent. Otherwise, like, I'm lost, right? So I bring that into everything. And what it's led to is, like, I tell people, like, I'm not going to tell you what to think, but I'm going to tell you to think. And I listen and I disagree, and people usually leave those interactions, like, you can imagine some of the calls I get. And the people who corner me at an event to talk about something, but by being intentional, people, like, we usually both leave the conversation like you used to 20 years ago. Let's agree to disagree. And you just move on. But if everyone is not intentional, and what that means is that if someone writes something crazy on my social media, like, I actually put myself into their shoes, and I often wonder, oh, do they have the same information I do? So let me educate them, like, instead of firing back.
And that's
So,
empathy. Yeah, only at its,
yeah, I mean,
at its core,
it's just
Feels like that, right?
civility.
That's so generous of you, Secretary.
I mean, sometimes I'm like, oh, I see, you didn't really want to learn. But,
Right.
but they have to teach me that. I can't assume it.
Yeah, that is really admirable, because I get triggered when people's comments are stupid.
Well, the best advice I ever got from another secretary when I was new, she was like, if it feels good, don't do it. Because she's like, you'll hear from a lot of people. If you write that email and it feels good.
Such a great advice. Great.
yeah, that goes for a lot of things.
No, just she's a better woman than I, that's all.
I'm going to ask one more from the list here. There are several here on this information, but I think we've hit that pretty heavily, I think, in the last like half hour, so I'm gonna ask this one here. Organizations like NancyOnNorwalk often act like civil infrastructure. Thank you. To Ashley over here and to the board over here as well. We try. What can residents who live can residents, what can residents who live in areas that these vital services do, I would assume like have, how can we fill the gap? I assume for areas that don't have the access to that sort of like personalized, on the ground, feels very familiar and local, that when we turn to a, you know, perhaps some folks have felt detached from legacy media, and rather than having a publication like us, they run down the YouTube rabbit hole. So I mean, so I think it's a, like, how can they fill the information gap?
I mean, here again, I think that this is really tough. And Justin, I frankly think that you can comment on, you know, how to make local news more robust and what you would need. I think that if you're in, you know, a news desert, you're locally screwed. But nationally, I think like I said, you go with the tried and true, and you go with people who have a good track record, and you can find, obviously, we have access to very trustworthy sources because of the internet nationally. But locally, if you're in a news desert, I don't know what you do. I mean, you know, as I've said, I mean, you know how hard it is, and to pull something like this off. You know, so Norwalk, and not every town can do that.
Well, one thing I want to hop on that real quick, this goes back to what the secretary was saying, in that, you know, the things that I see, or that we see from our perch, and also from Facebook perch and all of that, is very often when someone has a complaint or a grievance, because that's when people speak up, right?
Yeah.
The Yelp of society, right? Like, people don't leave the good reviews, they leave that, right? But they just don't know who to complain to, because, you know, this is with the sidewalks, I'm gonna send an email to, you know, my congressman. They're like, well, I'm not like the right person. You know, I think when people feel empowered, positively or negatively, to reach out, to seek information, they just don't know where to turn.
But I often say Connecticut is a small state that acts like it's Texas.
Yeah.
I agree. Like, literally, there's 1 degree of separation in Connecticut. And I think if we don't expect everything to do all things, like, that's the formula, right? I was at an event somewhere in Connecticut, I forget, I think Eastern Connecticut, and they were awarding a lady who, like, 7 years ago decided, like, we don't have enough information about our local government. So she herself just started going to the council meetings or whatever form of government they had, recording them. And then she used to have an email, but then she eventually set up a YouTube, and she just tapes every single meeting, and now it's become a thing in that town. I feel like there are many different examples like that, and there are people doing this work. So perhaps media in those deserts just will look different. But if we give people these ideas, we try to amplify people who are doing this work to spur others to do more work like it. I don't know, it's something.
Well, you know, I'm glad that you said that, because that does give me, I do want to give a bit of a positive note. You know, the barrier to entry with journalism used to be very high in terms of, you know, when I got into the business, you had to have a $50,000 heavy camera and a photog, as we called our cameraman, in order to do a story. So I couldn't just do a story. I couldn't just go to Capitol Hill and chase a presidential candidate around on my own, but now you can. And so it has, in that way, become democratized. The downside, of course, is misinformation, and that they don't have all of those layers of fact-checking. But you don't need, I used to have to beg somebody to hire me so that I could have access to that $50,000 camera, beta camera, so I could do a story. And in some ways, it's wonderful that all of these seedlings of journalists, you know, and people who are interested in getting information are out there. The problem is you have to know who to trust. So, I mean, obviously there's a downside to this proliferation, but there's also something great about somebody just going and plugging in her phone and hitting record, and there you have suddenly the city council meeting.
And I do think there's a bit of a style. That example, like there is no reporting. She's doing a service.
Yeah, that's like
saying-
C-SPAN. She's basically just a
she's
stringer,
basically saying,
right?
The town is deciding this. Here's the tape.
Yeah, yeah.
Tape at 6.
And there's something valuable, I mean, that's valuable.
It is. And then there's a lot of people interview me, I'm thinking now, but yeah, they're not channels, they're not local outlets.
They're a podcast, or they're
nonprofits. Like I was talking to a group that serves the Latino community in the Hartford area, and they're like, we're starting a television network. But basically, they have a camera in their office, and it's more interview style. So they had me come in to talk about how do you start a business and tell me about civics. And then she was saying, oh, we interviewed someone from the Board of Education to talk about like what the issues are in Hartford around education. So these things all help because it's hard to start like something big. But something big almost always starts from something small.
On that note, thank you for very
Raffle time?
thankful that, for two reasons. Number one, that Secretary Thomas and Ms. Camerota are willing to hang for a few minutes to answer potentially a few questions of your own. It'd be nice.
You guys look like a tough crowd.
But also, I've got 5 signed copies here to hand out, and I'm gonna just grab from our beautiful tote bag,
Okay.
hand-drawn, by board member Jerry Warner.
Nice.
He had to leave. Oh, you had to leave. Oh, anyway, wanted to point that out. So, I'm just gonna, actually,
I'll just audit.
Make sure this is on the up and up. Go ahead.
I'll do it. Okay, first one, 714086.
All right.
7140, that's you. Next one, 714056. Oh. I heard a lot of. Somebody's got it. Okay. I'll put it aside for the moment while you check. 714068. 068.
Yeah.
There you go. All right.
This is a very loose audit happening.
714065.
Woo!
That Vicky looks trustworthy.
Yeah. All right. Last one, unless no one claims this one. 071. 714071.
Woo! All right.
I'm gonna say it one more time. 056. Going once, going twice.
All right, you have to be here to get your book, you know?
I know.
069. 714 069.
Hmm?
We defer to the next.
That's nice of you. Nice of you. It is. The golden ticket.
064. 064.
Hmm? Anybody? Anybody?
You got it? Yay!
Yay. Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for coming, guys.
Hey, 15 minutes or so, there's a card out here at 9 o'clock, so zip on out before 9.
Okay.